Hi, and welcome to VIBEZ Daily. This is a daily devotional curated by VIBEZ Church to help you practice the way of Jesus and be all that God has called you to be. You have joined us for our year-long series titled Devoted. Acts 2:42 tells us that the followers of Jesus were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. This podcast was created to provide context and commentary for what you read each day. Just before our friends begin discussing today's reading, we want to invite you not only for fellowship, but for prayer as well. We have created the VIBE Daily Chat Group to offer you fellowship and a community where you can state your observations, ask questions about the reading or the podcast. You can join us by downloading the VIBEZ Church app in your favorite app store. Click Join the Conversation and join us today. And finally, we hope that you can join us for prayer. Prayer happens Monday through Friday, and more information on that can be found on the VIBEZ Church app under prayer. Now, let's begin our conversation on today's reading.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today here at VIBEZ Church. I'm Shameeka and I'm super thankful that you guys are joining us, whether you're tuning in for the first time or you've been following the readings the entire time. We're super excited to have you today. Now, I have a couple of friends here with me today, more like family. We have Pastor Eric and Victoria, and we've just been having conversations along the way, talking about the reading plan, and we're super excited to join in today. Now, we're on day 50, y'all.
50.
Woo, 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 woo.
50.
Day 50, and we'll be jumping in on Numbers 25 through 30 today. And before we get started, we always like to start the week off with a little question just to warm up so you guys can get to know us a little bit more. So the question of the day is, if you guys could be a part of any event in the Bible, what would you want to be a part of? If you could be there real life, in real time, what would that event be for you?
I need to go last.
You go last?
Yeah, I'm
okay.
going last.
I can start. Yeah. And shout out to Tonya, who asked this question to us a couple weeks ago. It really got us thinking. And so I think I've settled on my first answer that day, which was the Red Sea. Like, there's some fun stuff. Like, I would have loved to have been there. Well, I won't answer because I want to take nobody else's answer later. But the Red Sea, it's just such an incredible, like, demonstration of God's power. Like, I just can't imagine in a sea or an ocean just, like, opening up in that way. And so just to be among the Israelites just walking across this dry land and having that to just always depend on, like, I can't imagine having that in my memory bank, right? Of just, like, what God did before. So yeah, I would have just loved to be there. I could be in the back. Like, I don't care where in the numbers, but as long as I'm not with the Egyptians,
We need to be on the right side.
Yeah, I want to go to the right side. It is. It's on the right side. But I would have loved to have been there for the Red Sea.
That's good.
Yeah, that's actually a really good answer and interesting too, because like I can't even imagine seeing those waters like parting that way.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
woo.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess I'll say mine. I always think of the day of Pentecost, like when there was tons of fires, but they were just up in that upper room, and it was just this really intimate time of worship and fellowship among the believers, and it was the first time that anything like that had happened.
Yeah.
I feel like, man, if I could be in that moment, that's something that I always reflect on. So that would be definitely my answer for sure.
In the upper room.
The upper room.
That'd be fine.
That's a good one too. And mine's similar to yours. I finally settled on it because, I think I settled on it.
But
It's close to yours, but it's when Jesus resurrected and like he shows up like in the room with his disciples and like disappears again. Like he shows them like his hands and his feet and stuff. I would have wanted to be there for that.
yeah. That's actually pretty cool.
Yeah. That's a good one.
There's so much stuff though.
There is.
All right,
Like,
you guys didn't take my second one, so I'm just gonna throw this one out there too. Last one would have been just actually like the Last Supper.
yep, I was gonna say that.
Just to be there when his last teachings with his disciples and just kind of that moment and establishing that, you know, and it's an added perk that maybe I would have made the painting that goes around.
Yeah, you're ridiculous.
I don't know. It's a really famous painting, you know? That'd be dope.
Yeah.
Right.
That's really good.
Right. Yeah. That'd be fine. Oh, good stuff.
Goodness.
All right. All right, we'll start with chapter 25.
Okay.
So appreciate again you guys joining us. We were gonna conclude Numbers this week, but we got a few chapters to get through. So kind of where we left off was with Balaam, right? This back and forth between Balaam is we had the donkey, but we also had like the curses that were supposed to be curses that ended up being blessings, right? That kind of piece as he was paid to do that. So that's where we left off last week.
Yeah.
We kind of just pick up here 25 with Israel kind of choosing to worship Baal and some of the influence that they have here in 25. Talk to me a little about this, because there's some obviously some sin, but there's also some intervention. It's kind of a really interesting story that happens here in 25. What jumped out to you guys?
They wildin'.
Okay.
Yeah, this worship of Baal, like, come on, guys. Like, how many times we keep seeing all these laws and God keeps showing up and he keeps forgiving. And yeah, you guys are in this wilderness, but here they are being invited to sacrifice and to other gods. And this is something he said, one of the main things that God has been saying to them: no other gods, no other gods. Like, it's been repeated time after time. And it's something that's really important to him. And for them to just be like, yeah, let's go and bow down to these other gods. And I think it's really interesting that it's these Midianite women here. Like you said, foreshadowing. Was it foreshadowing? Like later on that it mentions that, like, in one of these wars they mentioned that it was Balaam who enticed these women to like have the Israelites worship Baal with them. And so this whole incident here, like, was just something I don't know, it grieved my heart.
Yeah.
It grieved me because I'm like, oh, Lord. I felt bad for the Lord. Like, I was like, like, you put all this time, sacrifice into these people, and then at the first invitation to bow down, maybe not the first, who knows, but at this invitation to like bow down to Baal, like, they're in it. And just and the man who just like flaunts this woman right in front of everyone, like, it's just like, there's no shame. Like, you have no shame here.
Yeah. I think what really stuck out to me was, I feel like this was a moment for us to really see how aware and cautious, like, you need to really be.
Yeah.
Like, to know that this came about because of sexual immorality and just like lustful temptation.
Yeah.
It just goes to show that, like, you really got to be on your P's and Q's and stand on guard, because it could come in anyway. And we were kind of used to seeing it in the context of, like, out of their, like, impatience as the Israelites, out of, like, man, we just want, we just need something to kind of bow down to. We kind of saw it come in that form. And I feel like this was the first time I'm like, yeah, like, the trick of the enemies or the schemes of the enemies could be from anywhere. So you need to be, like, aware and guarded on all sides. And so, I thought that was pretty interesting, and how, as a result, like, their guards were down, and it was just seemingly so easy to just, like, we gonna do this because I'm getting something out of this, like, that is feeding my own sexual desires. But I do love to see how Aaron's son Phineas, like, his response as a result of it, and his response is what ultimately end up saving people, and also giving him an extra blessing and favor from the Lord as a result of that. So that was very, I would say, like, commendable to know that he's like, we're not about to tolerate this.
Right.
Yeah, I think what you're pointing out to me are, like, the two, I guess, big ideas from it. Number one is, like, again, be careful who you, like, yoke up with, right? Like, who you allow into your circle of influence, right? Regardless of the motivation, whether it was lustful in this case, or whether it's just, maybe it's something they have to offer you financially, or they got, a nice crib or whatever, like, whatever it is, like, be careful who you allow into your circle, because they obviously can influence, your behavior. And that's what happened with the Moabite women. And I think it's, and the Midianite women, I think it's important for us to, like, keep that in mind. That's why God makes some of the laws he makes about intermingling, because he's like, this is what will happen, right, if you invite them into it. And then I think the flip side of that was, to your point, the other big idea is just because they doing it don't mean I got to, right? Like, and just the power of being willing to stand up for righteousness and like do the right thing despite what others around you may be doing, and the benefit and the value in that kind of behavior. Because as you said, like Phineas doesn't just, submit to what everybody else is doing, but says like, I want to stand up for what's right and what God says, and what I know to be right. And from that, there's that reward that he's granted.
Yes.
Yeah. And I love that God honored that for Phineas. Right? That like further down we see like God's like, okay, like because you had this zeal for me, because of this, like he reiterated his covenant, right? That like that his lineage would have the priesthood and stuff. Yeah. So I love that. And I love what you said, like it's not that like it's like people are like bad. It's like, oh, stay away from them just for the sake of, right? Like, but it really is because God's like, it's really hard to be holy. Yeah. It's holy. It's like, it's hard enough in and of itself.
Yeah.
So when you're around people who aren't, it's just going to be that much easier to turn against God and to go against his rules. And like, literally that's at the center of it all.
Yeah. Yeah, just before we move to 26, I think is a reminder of one of those probably earliest illustrations I learned in like Sunday school growing up. That whole like, somebody stands on top of a chair. And someone stands on the floor, and like the person on the chair is supposed to try to pull the person up to the chair, and like how much easier it is for the person on the floor to pull you down than it is for the person on the chair to pull you up. And like that really is kind of what's demonstrated here. Like it is, like you said, it's so much easier to pull someone into sin than it is to pull someone out of sin, because like our fleshly nature is already there. So
that's good. And I also like the specific covenant that God made with Phineas. Like my Bible mentions it as a covenant of peace. And again, anytime I even just hear the word peace, I'm just like, I just take this breath in and breath out. That just you feel the peace of God. And I think that is such an amazing thing to have, far more than like livestock or land or like anything else that God could give them. The fact that he had a covenant of peace with them, that's a really big deal. Especially when we saw in so many instances where with their straying away and all that stuff, like how easily God can be angered because he's justified in it. But to know that like they have a covenant of peace with him, like it just, I don't know, it was just something about that just really stuck out to me.
Yeah, good. Okay. Well, 26, we kind of get back into a section that reflects the title of this book, Numbers, right? We kind of open with this kind of idea here. Then we've had a bunch of narratives in between, but we get a bunch of numbers as a census taken, so a literal count of people, right? In 26. Anything that just stuck out to you guys about this section? It's kind of, I think, the second census we've kind of gone through here in Numbers specifically. But yeah, anything that just jumps out to you guys about this one?
I think for me it was interesting that the numbers haven't changed much, right? Like I was like, wait, he's been slaughtering them and giving plagues and sending, opening up the ground and swallowing folk up. Like he's doing all this stuff, and you can see that they're still multiplying at a rate that's kind of like as if it's not like he left them with nothing or no one, right? Like you would think that like, oh, I'm gonna kill like everyone. It was 20 and up. Like I'm gonna kill all these people, and then they're still just replenishing over these 40 years. I think it was just like a miracle, and just to see even still that like Judah was still thriving. Shout out the tribe of Judah still. That Judah's still like leading with his 76,500.
Yes. I actually went through and compared the first census from the second. Because I wanted to see from each tribe like who lost how much and who gained how much. And there was a couple of tribes where they lost a lot. Like for example, like the clans of Simeon, they lost 37,000 like men, and so there was some instances where you did see them lose a lot. And it's good that we did have the census again, because there were plagues that happened as a result of like their disobedience and God saying that they wasn't going to enter the promised land. But also you do see like there are certain tribes or clans that they actually had more. And so I was shocked to see at the end that there was only like 1,820 less men than the first census. Like literally, which wasn't a lot, but when you look at the numbers of what's happening, like you're just like, how?
Yes.
But then also too, like being able to see like the ones who often were impacted the most were the ones that like they had gotten into some trouble. So it was who was it? Was it Cora? Like Cora, and like we have these other people that just was doing things that were disobedient to God, like, and got wiped out as a result of it. It was really cool to kind of like really compare the two, and also think about that this census was taken, like, you know, I'm not sure how long after the first one, but there are certain people probably now in this census that wasn't counted before, but now they're of age because it's 20 years 20 and older for the men. So yeah, they still are large in number.
And I'm glad you pointed out the tribe of Simeon, because the guy who brought the woman the Midianite, he was from that tribe. And so it's like
yeah.
And I'm also glad you did that comparison piece. I think that's probably a good practice for anybody reading. It'd probably be good to go back and look at the difference there, because there's obviously a point in which a reason that God did that. I was gonna say, I just call out, speaking of Korah, like I just thought it was interesting that God didn't like end his line. Like they said, like the sons of Korah didn't die, right? Essentially. And that like it's again almost this element of grace, right? We kind of talk about, oftentimes it feels like God is just judging and there's just this justice and like there was, right? But like there was also an element of grace in that it didn't necessarily, like, he didn't punish the generations behind him, you know, just based off of that. And so I just thought that was pretty interesting. I think that's verse 11 where it kind of points that out to us here. And so I thought it was interesting.
And to that point, the sons of Korah have written a lot of the songs. Like they were the musicians of the Levites. And so a lot of them you'll see in the Psalms, you'll see like the sons of Korah. And I was like,
wow,
they done made it to worship in the Lord.
Come on.
They learned their lesson.
They sure did. They saw Grandpa go down.
It's like,
nah.
No, not us. We ain't gonna let that happen again.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to mention too how the clan of like Manasseh, they ended up having 20,500 more men than what they had before, which is a really large number. And it brought me back to when it was Joseph's dad, right, that kind of gave them the blessing. Israel. Yeah, that gave like Manasseh and his brother the blessing. And I feel like we're still continuing to see that fruitfulness happening as a result of the blessing that he passed down to them.
I love it.
Good.
I love it.
Okay. All right. So speaking of those blessings passed down, in chapter 27, we have a unique case here where essentially Zelophehad, I can't say his name correctly, didn't have sons, right? And only had daughters. And so they kind of bring that to Moses and just kind of ask, make a case for, hey, we deserve some land too. Anything that you guys thought was interesting in this piece before we get to the second half of 27?
Yeah, I love that they pointed out, like, hey, our father died because of his own sins. Okay, he wasn't part of Korah.
Yeah.
He wasn't part of Korah, y'all. But he died because of his own stuff. But even that they even pointed out that, like, he died because of his sins. And, like, not just like, oh, he just got old.
Right.
But, I love that part.
Yeah. I think this was a bold move for them. Like, to be women, to actually, like, step up and be like, hey, we want to make sure that just as a result of our father dying and everything, that our clan doesn't get like just kind of forgotten about. And I love that they do end up getting an inheritance for asking, but how God is still looking out for them. Like it reminds me of like the widows and the poor and like all those things, like how God is still a God that like cares about that stuff. And how he also felt like it wouldn't have been a fair thing to like just not allow them to have an inheritance. So I think this conversation was a good one to see.
Yeah. And I also love that it also established like a new precedent, right?
Yep.
That it was almost like, oh, that is a good point. Let's also declare going forward that this needs to be the rule. Like it's not just an exception we're making for you, but this is something that really needs to be the case every time.
Yeah.
And I think it is. It's also, we'll see, because even when we get to some of the vows which are coming here later in this book, I think again, God gets a bad rep in the Old Testament regarding his like, I won't say treatment of women, but like what the perspective is or perception of women. And I think like this is an example that like God doesn't see any difference, right? Like there is still value, and he wants to look out for, like you said, the widow or, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
There's order, right? He has order and he has kind of a headship and that kind of thing that's established, but it's not like he doesn't think the women are worth it, right? Because he could have said, well, hey, you're a woman, you don't get land, right? And so we'll just give it to the whatever guy he felt like, or the brother. He could have skipped straight to his brother, right? Which I think was the law. It was like, if there are no daughters and there's no, whatever the case may be, he could have just skipped straight to that and just said that's how it would be. But yeah, I think it actually shows the way he values women.
Yeah. And I love that, like you said, the boldness of them to come up and ask. The impact of just seeing this story like come up over and over, right? Like you'll see here that like, okay, this is the declaration, but then later on when they're like doing the allotments of land, like they make sure that they point out like, okay, so the daughters, they'll get their portion, and then they even show that they actually were obedient, right? Like they did eventually marry within, the clan, their clan or their tribe. And so they did what they needed to do, and so like it just comes up over and over. I'm just like, if they didn't say anything at all, like I mean, just to even be, there's millions of people here we're talking about. So to even be like in the Bible, and that your case is actually like written and recorded down, I just feel like it's a big deal.
Yeah. Definitely history in the making right there, like a moment for them.
Yeah, good.
I was going to say before we kind of moved on a little bit, and this was in regards to the census, because I did end up writing it down that this second census was taken 38 years later from the first one. So we're already kind of like approaching that time of like they're about to go over into the promised land, because they're having to be there for 40 years because of the generation before them and them needing to be, killed off so that the new generation could go in. And so I'm like, 38 years is a lot of time that has passed.
I ain't lived that long yet.
Right. That's like your life plus some. But again, to your point, just still to see like they still were fruitful and multiplying in those 38 years.
Yeah, that's good. So we continue into 27, and really we get this kind of commissioning of Joshua to kind of take the baton next, in leading the people of Israel, kind of taking Moses' place, which is a interesting conversation. We've seen him sprinkled in earlier throughout Exodus and Leviticus, but this is kind of the first time it's like official, like Joshua's the next in line. Anything that just jumped out to you guys at the end of 27?
Yeah, I do love how we've already been aware that he was going to be the next in line, and for some of the reasons, but I do love how it pointed out that he has this spirit of leadership and just being able to call out and show that like this is why he is being chosen to be in the next. Like he does have the Holy Spirit in him, but also this like spirit of leadership where he's capable and equipped to be able to lead these people into the promised land.
Yeah, I do love that it did specify again that with Eleazar, the priest. The priest, I don't know why I did that, but the priest, that of course it just signifies again that he's going to be using the Urim to understand the judgment of the Lord. And so, like, once again, he's not Moses. The Lord's not going to be coming down this cloud and talking to him face to face like with Moses. Like, he's going to use this for understanding the judgments of the Lord. But like you said, that he put his hand on Joshua, and even that you mentioned that, like, he's equipped, like, from the beginning. Like, his first, like, assignment that we see is him leading them into war and battle, which is something that he's about to do again, right? Like, you'll go in and out at his command. Like, so he's already been commanding and leading them and preparing them for war. And so I love that part. But even just to back up a little bit to, like, verse 14, it once again was just like, okay, because both you and Aaron rebelled against me, you know, let me just reiterate that. Right. You know, failing to uphold me as holy at the waters before their eyes. And I think that was the big thing. Like, in front of all the congregation, you had this opportunity to reverence me and show me as holy. Because once again, like, this is like a parent and children here. Like, you're supposed to be modeling behavior. And so what you failed to do, here's your consequence. Let me just remind you again. Like, and so funny because when God talks to him about it, and like, he's like, this because you rebelled against me. But then when Moses is talking,
he's like, y'all made me do it. It was because of y'all. I was like, oh, so you ain't gonna hold yourself accountable.
Right.
Like,
I'm like, come on, Moses, because y'all made me. Like, come on. It's hilarious.
I literally thought the same thing when I saw that.
Right? Like, again, he's like, let me put you in your place because you did not. You say?
I do love how, because it talks about Moses giving him, like, his some authority with the community and stuff. I do feel like it's a good transition that's happening. That it's not like, here, I'm going to just throw you out here. But it's like, it's already kind of conditioning the people to also see Joshua as a leader, and as an authoritative figure for them. And so, I can appreciate that, how they transitioned that.
I think the biggest thing that stuck out, I mean, some of the things you guys said for sure, but also just, I just thought it was interesting that, you know, we deal with a lot of succession plans and things of that nature in leadership and whatnot, but just to see that, I mean, it was essentially, you know, God inspired, but handpicked by Moses, kind of like, it wasn't, you know, it wasn't the people's choice, like who was going to lead next, right? If it was up to them, it probably would have been Korah, who got swallowed up, you know, a few chapters ago. You know what I'm saying? So it wasn't the people's choice. It wasn't, you know, kind of a board, but it was essentially like God spoke and equipped kind of that next person. And so, again, not to say that it's that a universal way to approach it, but I did think it was interesting to see that that was kind of their desire there. So anything else here about Joshua? We'll get to know Joshua pretty well a little later in our reading this year, but anything else about him?
Excited to see him start his ministry.
Come on, Joshua.
It was a good one. Really excited. We have a whole book dedicated to him later. So okay, so we go into 28 and we kind of get, not these offerings, they're not established, they're really kind of reminders here about some of these offerings that are to be made, but kind of they're summarized here and kind of put in one specific place for us to kind of see them all together. Anything that just jumped out to you guys about the offerings in chapter 28, its repetitiveness, anything you saw new this time as you read it, anything of that nature?
I think the only thing new that I saw in it was this verbiage of hold a sacred assembly and do no regular work. So it was just that reminder within these festivals and the Passover and like in these things, like although they're going to be doing stuff for like preparation and to just celebrate them, it still was a separation between like their normal work and then this. And so in a way it still was like this, almost this Sabbath, if you will, of like, no, this day is dedicated for this and this only. So yeah, that's something that stuck out to me.
I think something that was different, I could have missed this earlier, so let me know if I did. But
a lot of reading.
Somewhere, you know, in Leviticus numbers, I think I might have missed, like, when they're talking about this drink offering, it seems like now he's specifying it like it's a strong drink, like it's wine.
And so
in my verse 7, I'm sorry.
Okay.
It says, its drink offering shall be a quarter of a hin. So now we're giving like measurements for the drinks, right? For each lamb in the holy place, you shall pour out a drink offering of strong drink to the Lord. And then drop down to verse 14 in my version of ESV. It says, their drink offering shall be half a hin of wine for a bull. And it goes on for the other measurements for the other types. But it says wine. And I was like,
wow. My version actually says beer in verse 7.
Oh, yeah, there is a beer one. Yeah. My other version. Exactly. So it's like strong drink, beer. It's like, to me, I was like, okay, now we're getting detailed with what drink it is, right? And so it made me think we had just talked about the Nazarites. So I was like, okay, so the Nazarites just like somehow just bring the offering, but like don't partake. I don't know. Yeah.
But wasn't there like a point in time where he kind of established like not getting drunk and like all that stuff within the thing? So, and I can't remember like, was it to the priest to not come and drink?
I think it was a priest.
Okay. But who's drinking these offerings? And
do they just pour it out? Is this one of the ones they just pour out?
They might.
That's what it says.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
But I guess within what you're saying though, like there's still that separation between like how the Lord got the strongest. It's like he gets the best of the best or the holiest of the holiest, or like you still see that set apartness and distinction between what you give to the Lord and
like a steak and wine.
Yeah.
Like a pear.
Look, the Father loves the finer things. Okay?
We at the steakhouse, Lord. We at the steakhouse.
I'm like my Father.
Good. Made in his image, huh?
That's right.
I cannot do.
That's right. Good. Okay. 29 kind of continues that same conversation. There's just additional offerings. It really kind of could have grouped that with 28. Was there anything specifically that stuck out to you in 29 before we kind of conclude here with chapter 30?
I would say just when it talked about the Day of Atonement, just pointing out this fasting. Like in my version says, you must deny yourselves, which translates to you must fast and not work. And so I think it's cool to really see in the scripture God talk about fasting. And we know that Moses did it, with the 40 days and 40 nights. He ended up fasting when he was spending time with the Lord. So yeah, he's calling his people to really sacrifice in that way.
Yeah. I mean, that's what he requires of us as a whole, right? But as you said, it is something that's consistent.
Yeah.
And all of that, obviously, is just we continue to bring it up time and time again, but it's just still an act of trust in God, right? Specifically, and as you said, really kind of humility and putting ourselves in the place of like, God, your will, not our own, right?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. So.
Yeah, I love it. It's that self-sacrifice. He said that humility, that like self-control too. Because like you said, when they had gotten the quail for the first time, there was so much gluttony happening.
Yeah.
That he was just like, y'all just sicken me. Like this is too much. Like I'm giving you all this stuff to celebrate with. I'm giving you all this stuff to like. He said there's food part of every festival, right? Like they're eating, they're drinking, they're having a good time, but like I also know how to like check your flesh, right? And like put it back in check, and even just let that be a time to remember what this is about. Not about the food, not about the wine, not about the gathering, like about the Lord.
That's good.
Okay. Well, we had 6 chapters today, so we still have one more, chapter 30, to kind of wrap up here, but it was a real brief one. Talk to me about these vows. I thought it was a very interesting. This is from I remember it's the first time we really get laws around vows. Specifically, we had all the Exodus laws, we had Levitical laws, and now we get to Numbers 30 before we get this thing about actually making vows and how to deal with that. So what stuck out to you guys about God's policy on vows and promises made?
Well, one, I was a little bit confused going in at first because I'm like, what specifically is this vow? Like, I feel like it wasn't like this vow of marriage. Like, what is it? And I did kind of get a little bit of context, and you guys could probably shed light on it too, but it seemed like it was a vow in the sense of like, I feel like we kind of do this today where we're like, God, if you get me out of this, then I'll do this kind of thing. Or like something like that, in a sense of like where you're like, hey God, like this is my vow to you and my commitment to you. Is that what they were kind of describing when it came to vows?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's so much between them and God, but more so between each other. So very much more like almost like a contract, right? Like, hey, I vow to work your land for the next 7 years or 6 years, right? In return for, whatever it is the case may be, right? Or I vow to, I mean, we've seen vows in the Old Testament, but like, I vow to, but whatever it may be, but it's more like a contract between people, but oftentimes verbal. And they would, they use the language in this text that like, it's often even maybe like God is my witness, right? So like maybe it's between you and I, but God is my witness, or it's between you and I. And they said, even if it's not in the name of God, but you just kind of make a vow, that it still counts. And so it was more like that contractual thing. And that's why, particularly with the women, they gave that kind of authority to the husbands or the father, depending on kind of where they were, to kind of say, nah, she can't live up to that. Like, or I disagree with that vow that she's making, and essentially kind of free her from that. But it was much more about vows between people than it was necessarily about a vow to God.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I love in verse 2 is like, he shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. Like, what you say, you're going to do. And I think we live in a time where like we're really loose with our words, right? Like, I might do it. Like, oh yeah, I'm going to come. Yeah, I'm going to do it. And then like, you don't show up. Like, you know what I'm saying? So like, I think they were a lot bigger on like, what your words mean something, right? Even down to the blessings that we were talking about and the curses, and how like we actually saw those blessings and curses being fulfilled. Like what came out of your mouth held a lot more weight. And so even here, beyond just saying, oh, I'm gonna do something, it was like you said, as God is my witness, I promise, I swear, I'm going
my
to
mama.
Right. oh my mama, I'm gonna do this. And so, you're a mess. But for real, like, and so I think it was like when you even go to that level, and try and like bind yourself to doing something, like it gives opportunity for you do what you say you're gonna do, or for if you're a woman, your husband to be like, nah, she can't do that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I think Jesus comes around later in scripture and kind of brings this actual exact law up. And what he says though at the time is like, you've heard it said, right, that you make a vow in the name of, or in God's name, that like you ought to keep it. But he's like, you really shouldn't have to do that. Like your yes should just be yes, your no should be no. It shouldn't be about, like you said, God is my witness or on my mama. Like you shouldn't have to do that. You should just say, this is what I'm gonna do, and stick to it, right? Because that's ultimately what this law is about, is do what you say you're gonna do, right? And God is going to judge you accordingly based off of whether you do it or not. And the only exception to that is if a woman makes that vow and a husband or father says, ultimately, they can't live up to that, then I will release you from it and forgive you, right, about it. But other than that, even the woman needs to keep her vow, especially they have the examples of like widows and others who just aren't under a man's covering, that what they say, they got to stick to, right? So like, it was very much about do what you say you're going to do, keep your word, keep your promises, and that God is going to judge you for that. Like he takes it very seriously when we commit to.
Yeah, I think you explaining it in that way makes this not seem as random as I thought, because we do see a history of the Israelites like saying that they're gonna, oh yeah, God, we're only gonna worship you, and like yeah, we're gonna obey your laws, and then constantly break it. So I think it was a moment for God to show the seriousness of like, of your word and like vows, but also like giving them opportunities to like exercise that out in other ways that seemingly may not seem as like serious in a way as to like breaking a covenant with God, you know, but it still is a serious thing, if that makes sense. So yeah.
And I wonder, just like I wonder if it's something that just kind of came up similar to the daughters requesting land, right? That somebody came to Moses and was like, okay, they said they were going to do this and they didn't do it, right? Like, all right, we got to make a law. Like, we got to be clear about what the expectation is when somebody says something.
And I love that he says, like, and on the day that your husband hears of it, if he opposes. It's not like he never knew about it, so it has to go because you said it. But I do love that he gave them an opportunity. Like, once you hear about it, if you disagree, then at that point you can squash it and say no.
Or you can't even change your mind later, right?
Yeah.
Like, as the husband, you can't be like, I'm good with it now. But then down the road, I'm like, no, I don't want her doing this no more. Like, nah, you didn't confirmed and affirmed her covenant or her promise, her vow, so she has to keep it. Right. You know, even if it starts to impact you down the road, whatever the case may be.
Right.
Yeah. Good. Okay. We got through 6 chapters today. Yeah. So that was great. Again, come back and join us. 6 more chapters to conclude the book of Numbers tomorrow. And then we will transition to Deuteronomy right here in the middle of this week. So appreciate you guys joining us. Until next time, take care.
Thank you for joining us for the VIBEZ Daily podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or download our favorite, the VIBEZ Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us next time as we continue our journey through the Bible. Take good care.